Well, welcome back. Today, as we continue looking at these final verses in Paul's letter to the Philippians in chapter 4, I want to begin to address the question of what is the mind. Yesterday and even last week, we talked about the issues of stress, anxiety, the fearfulness, and all the things that go with that. And the real battlefield, as I said yesterday, was it's in our mind, what our thought life is going on. That's really that determines everything. In fact, one of the things we simply know about human beings is our actions are really the direct results of what's going on inside of our heads, not necessarily what's going on around us. So that if you're in a situation that's safe and stable and suddenly something happens that makes you fearful, suddenly a safe and a stable place can become a very terrifying place, even if in fact there's no threat at all to you as a person. It's kind of the idea of somebody coming up behind you and startling you, and you jump back and scream or shout or react or however you do it. And then you realize, well, I have just overreacted to something that caught me off guard. Well, there again, where was that all taking place? It was taking place right here between your ears. Your earlobes were playing games with you. And so now you realize that it was an overreaction and you were safe and you're not in a threatening situation. But I use that just to illustrate how powerfully we can be affected in our behavior by things that aren't really true or right or honest inside of our own head. So the question I come down to, and to begin with, is what is the mind? And maybe to expand a little bit, we find that we could ask, what is the heart? Well, how is that different from the mind, and how is that different from the soul? You know, the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia has this interesting statement. It says, we look in vain in the Old Testament and New Testament for anything like scientific precision in the employment of terms which are meant to indicate mental operations. So by mental operations, he means my heart, my mind, my soul, my thought life. These terms are used throughout the New Testament, and they're actually translated in various ways, and they're not laid out in very concise or scientific ways. We're somewhat used to a world where language tries to be as precise as it possibly can, unless, of course, you're involved in the world of politics, and then it's word salad all over the place. But the simple fact is the Bible used words in a much more fluid way. Not that they don't have definite meanings, but the meaning is always defined by the context. And that's true in all languages to some degree, but it's true in the biblical language. In fact, one of the websites I often refer people to when they have questions about theology is it's called gotquestions.org. Gotquestions.org. They have it's a great place to go. You can simply fill out the search box and ask them any question that has biblical or spiritual relevance. And they have a ton of articles that are short, precise, easy to get to with biblical references. It's a great resource. I encourage people to use it. They're much more quickly to respond to your questions than I am, so you might want to take advantage of that. But anyway, one of the things that they said in regard to the idea of what is the mind is that biblically they said the mind is simply the inner being or the sum total of our mental, emotional, and spiritual faculties without drawing fine distinctions between them. In other words, he's saying that when we see heart, soul, body, mind, and so forth, there's not a sharp distinction that's being drawn. And I say that because, for example, in what's called the Great Shema in Deuteronomy 6, Shema means to hear or to listen. And God said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord, says the following things." And one of the key parts of the Great Shema was quoted by Jesus, in fact, in all of the Gospels, where he said in Deuteronomy 6:5, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength." Now, it's interesting because when Jesus quotes this passage in the New Testament, it's translated in Greek, probably because it was being translated from what we call the Septuagint, or the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. It was the first time the Bible was translated from Hebrew, or the original languages, into the language of the common language, what's called Koinonia, or Common Greek, of the people of Jesus' day. And the wording comes out the same, but a little bit different, where it says, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart." And in that sense, it means with all of your inner passion, the emotive part of yourself, the feeling side of yourself. We might say it's coming out of the right side of your brain. That feeling and emotion, the thing where we have passion. Love God with a passionate heart. Not just where we sometimes say, hey, love you, bro. But I mean, it's really loving somebody intensely. When I look at my wife and I stop and I look her in the eyes and I say, I love you, that's a different way of talking about love than when I say to somebody casually, hey, love you, take care. And so he says, you can love with all of your heart. And then secondly, he said we need to love with all of our soul. The soul is that inner life-giving essence of who we are. A man became a living soul. He became the body, which was nothing else but matter, suddenly became animated. And so that the life force that's in us, the thing that really drives us, it's the eternal part of us. It's a part of us that never ages. It's the part of us that will exist after our bodies die. It's our soul that goes to heaven and or goes to hell. And that's why it's so important to understand that the soul is non-material, non-tangible, and it's also eternal. It doesn't dissipate with the body. From dust to dust we may go, but the simple fact is the soul goes on forever. So God created man out of the dust of the earth. He breathed on man. He became a living soul. That soul is an eternal aspect, and that soul ultimately will be given to God. If we love God with all of our heart and with all of our soul, then we go to heaven. And if we love the world and the things of the world and with all of our heart and with all of our soul, then we will go to Hell, we'll go to hell, and we'll experience eternal separation from God. But the third thing he says is, and to love God with all of your mind. Dianoia in the Greek is a word that means deep thought. Literally, it's the intellectual, the imaginative, the creative, the cognitive side of your brain. We might say it's the thinking part of who we are. So when Jesus was laying this out or explaining it, he says, you need to love God with a passionate desire. It needs to be an emotional experience. You need to be emotionally connected. It's not just getting information. It's experiencing an emotional transformation that really changes the whole trajectory of your soul, and so that your mind is now animated with thoughts of God, things that are holy and heavenly. And that's, interesting, this last part about the mind, because it's the mind that really in many ways persuades the heart to react the way it does. And ultimately is the thing that connects us with God, connects the soul with God. So in my mind, I believe, and that's why I think it's interesting, Paul said, when he was talking about the conversion formula, if you will, in Romans 10:9, he said, if you confess with your mouth, and that's basically a cognitive expression of the truth. If you confess with your mouth, that's an act of the intellectual mind working. If I confess with my mouth, we might even translate, if I believe deeply in my thought life, in my mind, if I believe these things to be true about Christ, and I also believe them with my heart, I allow them to take control of my actions of my life. So it's both cognitive and it's emotive. And so that I believe in my mind and I'm responding with my body, he said, then you'll be saved. It has to be that combination, because there's lots of people who kind of in their mind believe, because they've been raised that this is the truth, and they believe in the Lord the same way they might believe in speed limits, They just simply say, well, this is the right thing, this is what I should do, but it doesn't really catch them emotively. It doesn't really govern over their life. You see, if I truly believe that speed limits are good, then I'm going to drive at the speed limit. But many times we believe that other people should follow the speed limits, but we're not sure it actually applies to us. So here we have an intellectual ascension to something, but we don't have an emotional response to it. It doesn't carry over into our actions. And so he said these are the things that become critical for changing the way that we live our lives. In fact, Paul would write to the Corinthians, he said, for who has known the mind of Christ that we should instruct him, but we have the mind of Christ. We have the mind of Christ. That's what happens when Christ came into my heart. He began to stimulate my thought life intellectually. I began to gain vision of things that I couldn't see before I was saved. I had my eyes open to a dimension of reality that was not clear to me before my conversion. And I could see things from a whole different perspective. I often tell people that when I got saved, when I received Christ, that's literally what I recognized, that I could not look at anything in my life the same way. And it caused me to respond differently. There were things I stopped doing. There was other things I started doing. These two things had nothing in relation to me. I stopped doing drugs and all that crazy stuff. I started reading the Bible and wanting to know more about Christ. I started praying. And I'd never really seriously read the Bible or prayed or even wanted to hang around with Christians because I thought they were total dorks. And suddenly I was one. I was one of those dorks. And, but it made completely sense. And that's why we used to refer to ourselves as Jesus freaks, because the non-Christians saying, you guys are just freaks. And we say, yeah, but we're Jesus freaks. So this whole process is so critically to understand that there's a coordination of these things, that the ultimate direction of my soul, the animation of my life, is going to be responding to first believing something is true intellectually and then feeling that effect of believing on my life and seeing things as they are. And that's why I say that what Paul says to us in 2 Corinthians 10, he says, we demolish arguments and every pretense that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought. So what we're talking about here is really controlling our thought life as being the foremost thing we need to learn to do. But I'll pick this up tomorrow on the other side because we're out of time. God bless you, and looking forward to continue talking about it. This is good for me to hear, as well as you, I trust. Many blessings in Jesus' name.